Welcome back to another deep dive into the world of Genshin Impact. Today we're unraveling a tapestry of lore that intertwines celestial events, ancient prophecies, and the very fabric of life and death in Teyvat. As we prepare for the exciting launch of Genshin's 5.5 update, intriguing details have surfaced concerning the elusive Moon Sisters. With the release of the Welkin Prophecy and the history of the three Moon Sisters, many speculate that these may be a nod to future updates like Nod Cry and other celestial lore. But what do the moons truly signify? That's why I'm here. That's why you're here. It's clear that it's something. Hoyo has been building up to this with the 5.4 patch being called Moonlight Amidst Dreams. It's looking really fascinating. So let's dive in and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much. Let's start with part one, discussing the prophecy itself. The web event tells us that the prophecy has been unveiled, signaling a new lunar phase that coincides with important celestial events, such as the blood moon lunar eclipse that happened at the 14th of March of this month and when the live stream was. The cyclical themes of the moon reflect not just time, but the very essence of fate within Teyvat. The trinity of moon goddesses who once steered the primordial celestial sphere and wove love and passion into the very heart of the world have long since faded into the shadows of time. Yet those who follow the tides still sing and pray, for a new moon is set to rise. When the eternal moon fell, the heavens and the earth were thrown into chaos. And this is our first moon. So we have three separate moons that are outlined here. When the iridescent moon shattered, the crimson shadows sank into the abyssal sea. So the iridescent moon, we can also see that is the Crimson Moon Dynasty. You should be thinking of Conria. I'm thinking of Conria. And I'm also thinking of iridescent as being something that has a certain quality of light that turned crimson, like the iridescence was taken over. So that shift, that transformation is really interesting because it only happens after the eternal moon falls. After the eternal moon falls, things are thrown into chaos. Things start to change. The iridescent moon turns crimson and it sinks into the abyssal sea. And thirdly, when the frost moon ceased to turn. And so here, we have another change. It is that not that the frost moon is destroyed, but that it ceases to turn. And that kind of means, if you know about astronomy, that day and night is not happening. Nations faltered and fell into ruin. The world no longer sheltered by eternity, and eternity, you should be thinking in Izoma, you should be wondering about the Rocket Shogun, marches toward its final breath. Yet from the ashes, the new moon rises, its ascent spinning the wheel of fate anew. And so we now have a fourth moon, the new moon, that is coming into play. So there are the three moons of old and the new. Most of the time, I start with the summer, but I actually think Genshin has lined this up so well that I will be starting with more broad concepts on astronomy. So let's break this down. We have 40 stars and 24 primos located in the top left and bottom right corners of the game's overview. If we consider one primo as equivalent to one day, starting from today, that will take us to May 13th. And mark your calendars because guess what, folks? That's a full moon. This is interesting timing because just a week after May 6th, patch release, we see those 11 mysterious question marks floating around in the lunar overview. Now keep in mind that patch 5.4 was the 39th patch of Genshin, and 5.5 will be the 40th, because those question marks be hinting at future patches. I think there's something bigger at play here, but we can kind of say that each star up to 5.5 represents a patch, and there is 24 something left to go, 24 stars or primos left to conquer. I don't know. That's just a theory. But let's zoom in the date of the live stream. Coincidentally, it is also the total lunar eclipse, and it was also the blood moon. And this is really interesting because we haven't seen so much where Genshin has lined celestial events in real life with events in the game. But we do see this actually every month because before the abyss changes, it was twice a month, but now it's once a month. Each blessing of the abyssal moon changes every 16th day of the month. And so we have another moon here, because if you think about earlier, the eternal moon, the iridescent moon, and the frost moon, none of those were known as the abyssal moon. But if you think about when the iridescent moon shattered, the crimson shadows sank into the abyssal sea, it becomes kind of clear that the abyssal moon, the blessing of the abyssal moon, is actually perhaps the blessing of the iridescent moon, in that the actual abyss corridor and where we are and where we see that moon is within the abyssal sea. Now, what that means, I don't know, but we've seen other concepts of the abyssal sea, such as with the all-consuming narwhal and Skirk's introduction. So I definitely think this is pointing towards the fact that maybe this is a sea that more so resembles space. Maybe the abyss is not what we have thought of it as. Maybe it is an interstellar looking thing. And so think about that. And guess what? The next new moon is on the 29th of this month. And so what does that mean? How do we connect it all? I think that we will come the 29th of March, we will find some more interesting lore information being dropped. This is just speculation, because during a total lunar eclipse, the moon takes on this beautiful red-orange hue. And I think this is kind of where they get the inspiration for the blood moon in Zelda, and is also where, if you know, Genshin was partially based off of Breath of the Wild, this is probably where we get some of the inspiration for this crimson moon. And why is that important? Because it's sunlight. It's sunlight which is filtered through our Earth's atmosphere that dances its way towards the moon's surface. And according to the people who know what they're talking about at NASA, it's like all the world's sunrises and sunsets are projected onto the moon, and that is what causes that red-orange hue. And how poetic, how beautiful is that? But I want to point out that if all the sunrises and sunsets are projected onto the moon, that kind of suggests a timelessness or a removal from time. And we know that Teyvat may be in a Samsara of. So really interesting there to see that correlation. For the first time in years, like this was actually one of the first blood moons where it was possible to see a moonbow, which is a rare phenomenon where a rainbow is created by moonlight. Moonbows only occur when the full moon is low in the sky. So it might remind you of how the moon looks with the kind of glow around it in game, both the crimson moon, the abyssal moon. Several times we've seen it. And I think that may be inspired by it. So are we on the brink of some exciting updates in the game that align with these astronomical events? It makes me wonder if more lore will be lining up with the solar and lunar eclipses come September. We just have to wait and see. Also, I want to point out that the diagram on the web event very, very closely mirrors Mona Majestus's splash art. If you look at it, and she's also standing on tides, which if we go back and we look at the prophecy, it says, those who follow the tides still sing and pray, for a new moon is set to rise, which either implies the people of Nod Cry may be doing that. And we actually do know that Mona is not from Mondstadt. Everyone assumed she was from Fontaine. But what if Mona, whose name is German for moon, has been more important to this all along? And perhaps she will be connecting us to Nod Cry and to the moon prophecy in a way that we hadn't thought of before. And so moving into part 3 of this video, I want to talk about historical references and ties to major events within the game. As in all things Genshin, just when and where are we? And I think it's important to wind way back kind of to the earliest lore we have about the Moon Sisters. So we know the ancestor of the Seelie once met a traveler from afar with whom they married, the 3 sisters of the Lunar Palace. And this is the first time we kind of see the moon and where it is described as a place. It is a lunar palace. It is a place you can go to in the sky somewhere. Arya, Sana, and Canon witnessed their marriage. Yet 30 days after the union between who we believe to be the second descender and one of the Seelie, disaster struck. The Seelie and their lover fled into exile, but the disaster eventually catches up with them. As punishment, they were separated, their memories wiped, and we know something happened to the Moon Sisters around this time. And this is found in the book Records of June, Volume 4, The Mountain Spirit. And so, can I perhaps take a moment to remind people that Liyue and Mondstadt literally mean the glazed moon and the moon city, respectively. And we have glazed lilies. We have a lot of moon flower kind of lore here. Moons are all over this freaking game. And we might know exactly where the frost moon is. Are you interested yet? I'm going to go even further down the deep road with this one. I promise I'm going to try and wrap it all up at the end of the video into a nice, neat little lore bow. But do you remember in Konomiya, the boatman, one of the kind of ghosts we meet, tells us about the scions. And the scions of the moon, of the frost moon, kind of, we didn't know who they were, but I'm assuming that's who he's talking about because he also mentions the Moon Mansion, which we now know is probably the Lunar Palace. And we know from the lore that the Moon Mansion is where the Frost Moon has locked herself away. So it exists out there somewhere. Maybe it's Celestia. Who knows? If we take that the heavenly principles is the first descender, then this person who married the Seelie is likely the second. And this calamity may be the war between the heavenly principles and the second descender mentioned in Before Sun and Moon. And of course, we always go back to Before Sun and Moon, which is somewhat of how the heavenly principles created Teyvat post the two wars that had occurred now. The first with the dragon sovereigns, and the second, the war with the second who came. This is a creation myth and it shows a marked shift in how the world of Teyvat functions. The fight between the primordial one and the creation of the four shades and removal of the dragon sovereign power by Phanes, the primordial one, shows us like kind of where modern Teyvat was created. And this is the creation myth that we know that created the world that the traveler is in now. And so the story goes that Phanes used an eggshell to separate the universe from the microcosm of the world 40 years after, and you'll be thinking of religious references, 40 days and 40 nights at this point. The branches that Phanes creates post that war with the dragons, 7 sovereigns vanish, they disappear. And the 7 nations that are left behind, they submit to the heavenly principles. And that is the creation of heaven and earth. And it's probably at this point that the rules that identify Teyvat, that identify how this world works, truly began to have a marked shift and change. And how in Renova, I would guess at this point, this is when she kind of steps in as a shade of the heavenly principles and takes over crafting the rules of death. So 400 years after those branches that create from the eggshell, the heavens and the earth, 40 years after that, we have the marked creation in Before Sun and Moon of humans by the primordial one and the shades, and that marks the start of a new age. And I kind of think of this as being synonymous with the ark opening, that there is, if you think of Noah's Ark in the Bible, there is a sacred plan for humans. And after this 40 days, after this period of creation, the ark opens, and then we get the first harvest, the first poems, the years of Jubilee, as it calls us, where the heavens took care of the people and did not fall into temptation. You could also even go further back with this. I say the ark because of the 40, but you could also say the year of Jubilee very closely resembles the Garden of Eden and the ideas that come with we do not attempt to go against the rules and the heavens take care of us. And so we have this new age. And then Before Sun and Moon takes us through the next step, which is the funerary year. And that is the second throne of the heavens came. War happens again. The world is messed up. The era of darkness begins. The 7 sovereigns find refuge in the oceans. And we think this is like really where the bishops were, where they started to be the race and develop their own civilizations. And the primordial one and the shades could not hear the people trapped in darkness. We're outside the year of Jubilee, and the gods cannot help the people. And this is where we get in Before Sun and Moon, the parable of the sun. A sage is gathered and he tells the people of the sun, he's like, there is more than this darkness and we must worship the sun. There was a life of darkness and fire. And then the leathed lotus, I swear, I can't make this up. A tribe of people who ate lotuses, which if you think about the lotus eaters in Greek mythology, it often just means people who are immortal and kind of like doing their own thing. They're isolated. Well, the lotus people, they keep searching. They're looking for the sun. They're looking for a way out of the darkness. Some people actually decide to stay. So we have a split here in civilization and what humanity wants, what they're doing. And in the third year of darkness, it is said that time did not forsake the people. Isaroth, who was the ruler of the unchanging world. And this is yet another hint that the future is no longer happening. Things are not changing. The days are no longer happening. And then we get the year of blindness, where the sage Abrax wakes up. He begins to build the Enconomia sun thingy because we have this sun worship. And so this is the third year of darkness following that war with the second who came. And we see that in the year of sight, the year following, the first year of sun and moon, and that's where the book kind of gets its title, because it's telling us, it is a creation myth telling us how sun and moon came to be. The divine chariot of the sun probably meant to either be the sister chariot to the moon sister silver chariot was completed. And so that marks the first year of sun and moon. And in the second year of sun and moon, the primordial one defeated the second who came. Those who went could not find their way back. Remember this in Sri Lanka. This is why we had to hang the moon, because people had left and they could not find their way back. That Sri Lanka kind of seems to mirror here of the people who left during this period of darkness could not find their way back. And so this is when we get kind of the first marketable shift in there are the people who stayed, the people that left, the people who believed in the primordial one, and the people who went searching for a new god or a new sun. And it's actually really interesting because immediately following this is the parable of the tree. And Genshin, just like Moon's, Genshin has a lot of trees. This is the planting of a tree that took 500 years to grow. And if you think about that, it sounds a lot like the sacred sakura growing through the past, but we know that hadn't happened yet. That would not happen until Conria. But that means the sacred sakura is not the first tree to take 500 years to grow. And it makes me wonder if perhaps this tree could have been Irminsul. But we do know that whatever tree was grown at this point, it took 500 years and the primordial one was the one who ordered it. And in the 10th year, we get the end of before sun and moon because Abrax, the saint who makes the sun thing in Enconomia, is gone. And this tale ends. And it's hard to find other pieces of lore to pick up this thread. But if we look at the lore of the Sumeru craftable Porn Moon Piercer, it's really useful here. That story is about the children who are fascinated by moonlight. Sometimes when looking at the solitary moon, the children would mourn just as the last king of the forest did as he was dying. Another legend says if you drink water reflecting the full moon from a small pool within the footprint of the forest king, you will become the king's attendant. And these kind of seem like very much a way to ascend status. And so it is in Moon Piercer we get the tale of the moon, which goes something like a story that comes from a very ancient dream. And dream is another way in Genshin to really signify memory. But so the moon goes like this. The story came from a very ancient dream hidden inside a Nilopala lotus. Long before, and I'm going to try, Aramu Hukukunda had been born from the pomegranate, and before a great and noble race and your ancestors walked the earth together. I'm thinking this is the first humans in the Seelie. There were once 3 sisters. When night came, they would leave the pearl-colored palace to roam the desert, and Nilopala lotuses would bloom at their feet. Ultimately, 2 moon wheels shattered into dust and disappeared. And this kind of implies that the chariot was held by one of the 3 sisters, like each wheel was a sister, and 2 died. The Frost Moon stayed. So the last of the sisters was so overcome with sorrow that she would never leave her palace again. For a long time, the moon debris finally fell to the earth. At that time, the god of vegetation had already brought the forest to the desert lands, and that we know is Rukkhadevata going to save the people of the desert, Deshret's people. And so that's our timeline. We're thinking around the time of Deshret and Rukkhadevata. And so where the dust of the moon fell, the Nilopala lotuses bloom. Those children who breathe in the dust will have a pearl-like moon in their hearts, it says. And this is why there are always children who are confused by the moon, and the reason why the Nilopala lotus blooms every night, and why the moon always favors certain children, because the three sisters who marry each other, the moon piercer tells us that they long to be reunited, that there is a part of their being that resents being separated, and the three sisters will always kind of like long for reuniting, which I love that, because it also kind of goes for the whole theme of Genshin. We will be reunited. It's literally the name of a quest, so I'll throw that out there. But the Nilopala lotus withered after telling this story. She had waited long enough for the desert to become a jungle and for the great race to be dethroned, long enough for humanity to appear on the earth, and for the Aranara who tell the story in Moonpiercer to appear before and speak to people. The Aranara lost many, many more memories as time goes on. And we know once Varanara was destroyed and we entered the dream, and not that I know what the dream is, but the dream is something that they keep telling us. When we enter the dream, that is the timeline we're on. So the dream starts after the demise of the Moon Sisters, which implies that before their death, Teyvat was still working as it should be. Before that kind of second war, the rules had not quite been fully rewritten. But post that second war, we now know that that is when the Cillian, the Descender, got married. That is when the Moon Sisters witnessed. That is when Rukkhadevata and Deshret were around. And this is when Varanara is destroyed. We kind of are starting to get threads of lore that are lining up the timeline for us. Moonpiercer tells us that children who are fascinated by the moon will weep when they gaze upon it, because the moon is turned into a fine sand and entered their eyes, and not a single tear through all these countless tales will be in vain. I don't know how you can cry in vain, but it kind of implies that like it's accomplishing some purpose. And the moon being sand and sand in the desert is just it's so interesting to me, so fascinating. I don't have all the answers on that. We're going to keep trekking through so you can maybe hear all these lore clues put together and give me some of your thoughts in the comments. It is also very fun that our fragile resin has been projecting these for quite some time, which also makes me believe the new moon is someone else, maybe say Paimon. And I think it's important to address just another like couple factors here. One, that the plane of Euthymia, the abyss, the eternal moon, those seem to be connected because they're also close to the earth. They're kind of always shown to be like these big things. And the eternal moon it makes sense that it would be in A's plane of Euthymia. And beyond the fake sky, it makes me wonder if that's the iridescent moon or the crimson moon, the one that is shattered. And you can also invert these. You could say, because if the crimson moon is the one that is in the abyss, it looks whole. And so maybe the crimson moon was the one that shattered. But they gave us this handy, we've been wondering this forever, and they gave us this handy prophecy. The eternal moon fell, the iridescent moon shattered, and the frost moon ceased to turn. So we get three separate actions that happen. One, a falling, two, a shattering, and three, a freezing, if you will. And so when we're talking about the moons and what happened to each of them, we can very easily say now that the moon that we see in the abyss is not the crimson moon because it is not shattered, or it is a past version, even though that is the moon that sank into the sea. And maybe it is the shadow of the moon. That is all we are seeing. We are seeing a shadow. That could also be the case, and the actual moon lies beyond the false sky. But it also means the moon that is in A's plane of Euthymia, this makes me wonder if it is perhaps a remnant or a shadow of our eternal moon that is no longer with us. And I think the only reference we really get, and why I think so many lore mains are pointing to Nod Cry, is that the frost moon, we've actually heard that word before. In the storyline with Helka, who is from Nasha Town and a member of Nod Cry, tells us that the frost moon scions generally are. So let's back up, actually. I was about to say something, but scion generally means they're a young shoot or a twig or a descendant of a noble family. So, like, it implies youth, and it also implies nobility or descent from nobility, which is such a fun double meaning here. What with the trees and the descendants of royalty? Because Helka kind of implies that everyone who is in Nod Cry is very, very young or is of a certain stature. The sinners of Conria really are the horsemen of the apocalypse, aren't they? Legacy and everything. And so we don't really know much about the Frostmoon Psychons, except for this little bit that's told to us by Helka, and to look out if we went. And he gives us someone to look for. And he tells us that the Frostmoon Scions gather on an island. So maybe we're going somewhere across the sea yet again. And when I say I usually start my lore dives with the summer event prior to the update, I do usually mean that. But it is in part 4 that we are finally going to start talking about Simulanka in this video. First up, let's talk about the moon lore we encountered in Simulanka. We had this amazing song in the Broken Sea called The Benediction of Dreams. Its lyrics, which we prayed and translated from Latin, brought us a powerful message. Oh, goddesses of fate, listen to our prayers. Oh, goddesses of fate, let it happen. Now, if we compare this to the web event, it's quite fascinating how it resembles the experience in Simulanka, a bit inverted night versus day. It's a clever twist that raises a lot of intriguing questions about the themes at play. Moving on to the side quest named Far Away, we helped the little guy hang a light in the sky. That was crucial because he believed that travelers who ventured far wouldn't be able to find their way back home without it. And so we turned to the goddess of fate for help to hang this light back in the sky. In the quest, we made a wish, and she used her powers to hang the moon back in the sky. Noir describes venturers as wanderers and wayfarers, or explorers and wayfarers, the ones willing to leave everything behind. And wayfarer, the guy's kind of giving me Star Rail vibes. He says, as Noir told us, they seek distant places like the far edge of Starfalls and the other side of the rainbow. And to get her help, to get the goddesses of fate's help in Simulanka, we need to offer 3 gifts. To the gentle statue, we offer the bright weapon to dispel the dense gaze as light does night. To the peaceful statue, we present our strong armor to guard our heart and keep it from going wrong. To the elegant statue, it says, make the wish you hold dear and clarify the reasons for your prayer. And I think this is really interesting because kind of the benediction of dreams, and a benediction is like kind of, to my understanding, often pronounced by a religious leader at the end of a service. So the song that's playing when we're doing this quest is a formal blessing from the goddess of fate. And I think that's really interesting. Blessing of the Welkin Moon, blessing of the abyssal moon. You kind of get the picture. But all these gifts were related to dragons. I'm trying to say their names. Panuel's dragon scale represents the armor. The dragon horn symbolized the weapon, and our wish was to bring the light back to the sky. And the sky, the suns, are often referred to as the place and the refuge of dragons. Now, before we move on, I cannot help but notice a fascinating connection to our new world boss, the Simulanka dragon. It drops the same items we need for our offerings in Simulanka, and here's what we get from it. We get the eroded horn, which is the horn from the Lord of Eroded Primal Fire, known for its fiery glow that once illuminated the savage world. And that reflects what we give the gentle statue, which it was something used to dispel the dense days as light does night. The eroded sunfire is the second drop, a ring-shaped flame that holds remnants of the sun's lights despite being partially corroded. And that sunfire is meant to represent the sky, what we give the elegant statue, our prayer or thoughts. And it is the shape of a ring. which is really fascinating. And finally, we have the eroded scale feather, a pitch black scale that, despite its twisted darkness now, was once a means of transmitting secret messages from ancient dragons. Really interesting. That is similar to what we give the armor that we give the peaceful statue, which guards our heart and keeps it from going wrong, which kind of applies that because there is twisted darkness on the eroded skull feather, that the messages between the dragons were something that helped them stay on the correct path. And that is like not really a thing anymore. So, whether it is the weapon, armor, or the light hanging in the sky, there is an undeniable connection between this prophecy and what is happening in Sri Lanka. And as we often know, the summer events foreshadow the update. So, I'm so excited to see how this pans out. Moving on to part 5, I want to talk about connections between some of the playable and non-playable characters we have and the moons. Characters such as Paimon, the embodiment, or who I'm going to call for the rest of this video, the embodiment of the new moon, and others closely connected to moon lore like Nilo will resonate on a deeper level once we dive into them. The concept of the moon as a chariot carrying destiny emerges repeatedly across various character arcs. And where other than who to start with than with the eternity herself? The eternal moon is the first moon. So let's talk about our Archon of Eternity, Miss Raiden A. So the new moon isn't just a celestial body. The moon itself is not just a celestial body. It signifies destiny in Teyvat, appearing repeatedly throughout various character arcs, whether they're guiding us on our journey or embodying profound ideas. These characters invite us to look beyond the surface of what is going on in Teyvat. Raiden and the concept of a sheltered eternity. In a world where most are content to simply exist, Dainsleif reminds us, in the hidden corners where the god's gaze does not fall, there are those who dream of dreaming. Now, this is a powerful statement that hints at the layers of reality and dreams within Teyvat. And we remember A's words from her very magnificent, "Only through eternity are you closest to the heavenly principles." But here's the catch. Teyvat is not eternal. It is dynamic, ever changing, and that's why I make videos like this. We are in a realm shaped by cycles, a fake sky, a samsara situation, but what lies beyond the enticing imagery of Teyvat? Many lore creators point to the fall of the moon as a focal point of our narrative, but the waters and waves of Fontaine introduce a flood narrative that's hard to ignore. And I mentioned Noah's Ark earlier. I'm going to mention it again. Floods often emphasize cleansing and new beginnings while warning us about divine judgment, and they mirror the trials and tribulations humanity faces. And I think it's really interesting that we have with the moons this kind of concept of a flood when the entire purpose of the Fatui is the opposite. It's to burn, because burning is also seen as another form of cleansing that can also be divine. But in this case, as the archons are named after devils and demons and the R is Gosha, you may think about burning as in being in reference to hell, and you may be right. But as always, in fact, not all is as it seems. But floods often mirror the trials and tribulations humanity faces. Think of it this way. After the calamity struck, the world was caught in a tumultuous cleansing process, a cycle initiated by the moon's fall, or the 3 moons, going their separate ways. Was the world destroyed only to be reborn? It leads me to believe that we are observing a repeating cycle of destruction and renewal, and the goal is to end that cycle. As we learned in the Sumeru Archon quest, eternity is not actually the goal, it is the method. If the Moon Sisters are responsible for guiding time and death, the principles of eternity that have been brought forth by A pave the way for the world's cleansing. And we see this a lot in that eternity is the way that A fights off the erosion that happens to all immortal beings. Eternity is also the way that the moons were held in place, and it was only once it left, and only once the sheltered eternity left, that people began to dream of dreams. So think about that. Think about why the shift before the Moon Sisters fall and the post the Moon Sisters' fall really seems to have changed the world to its very core. And so this chains back to our narrative in Fontaine, which was flooded as a result of a grave sin and indicated to us, not for the first time, that the history of the future, and that is what it's always been referred to as the history of the future, cannot be neglected and nor can it be changed. But as Dainsleif tells us, where the God's gaze does not fall, and let's not forget the moment when we awaken Nilo from her dream to escape the Tsar and the Sumeru our conquest. Let's keep that in the back of our minds, and the people who are dreaming of dreaming, and how the dream is something that has to be interrupted to escape, and how when we hung the moon back in the sky, that was the benediction of dreams, or the blessing of dreams, that maybe we need to be thinking about just who or what might we need to awaken next to break free of the cycle that Teyvat is stuck in. I think of Makoto and Kitsune Saigo collaborating with Isaroth to plant the sacred sakura. I think of the other 500 years, and I think all of this leading back to the pivotal moment we're on the brink of, and what it would mean to burn the tree of Sumeru and to burn part of Irminsul. Is fire perhaps the way you break the cycle? Who knows? At this point, I'm going to leave A behind and I'm going to turn to Paimon. So, have you ever considered the possibility that the moon on a string might be more than just a whimsical metaphor? First off, remember when we fished Paimon out of the ocean? It's a moment that carries layer of meaning, especially more the story goes along. Then we have the Melusine, who hintingly refer to Paimon, alluding to hidden truths and the concepts of the unseen, as they always do. They refer to her as someone who is attached to something higher and resembles a rainbow. This could definitely tie into Paimon's enigmatic nature as a being we don't know what the hell she is. Maybe we do now, but it also kind of implies to us that she is connected beyond this world. And it's really the rainbow thing. I never understood it until we got to Natlan. And the Lord of the Night tells us that all of the elements, when they are reflected through light together, they form the rainbow. And a lot of what we've been talking about has been about the refraction and the changing of light and what light has to do with the goal here. And I'll talk more about Hu Tao later, because this is really like, this ties more into her than it does to Paimon. But here are where things get really intriguing. The Traveler, often regarded as a monster, and Pawn is associated with a rainbow. So the Melusine, for the first time, is like, Traveler is not a hero. The Traveler is someone who could swallow the world whole. Think about that narwhal. Think about Moby Dick, even creatures of water, but it implies that we are maybe a creature who is more associated with the whale and things like that, those types of monsters, than with the fire cleansing aspect, because I'm trying to figure out who associates to what. And that Paimon is the rainbow, or Paimon is all the elements combined. And what does this reveal about the connection between Paimon and the Traveler? We don't know yet, but I think we will soon. And I think it connects with the themes of fate we've seen in Simulacra and Fontaine. The idea that certain events are predestined, a history of the future, suggests that while some things are immutable, our perception of them can shift dramatically. Perhaps we are important witnesses in the birth of a new moon, just as Paimon is an important witness to the Traveler, as we see in Natlan. I've already put out a shorter video on Paimon's plots and connections to this lore that goes a little more in depth as the new moon, so check that out if you want more on this topic. And how could we talk about Crimson Moon without talking about the father herself, Aquino? Did you know that Arlecchino is a descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty? In an era shrouded in mystique, the Crimson Moon once illuminated Conria, but this glory faded once the rise of the Eclipse dynasty came. And it's really interesting here because the Crimson Moon we know is the second moon that shattered, the one that hangs in the false sky. But we also know that an eclipse is also an absence of a moon from the sky. So is the Eclipse dynasty perhaps one that rose post the Moon Sisters' fall? We don't know, but we can say that Arlecchino is distinctly tied here to Persian mythology. And yes, I did say Persian. Let's look at the myth of Sigmar, akin to the phoenix, which echoes throughout Arlecchino's name because Arlecchino is distinctly tied to that second form of cleansing, to that fire. Arlecchino means consume or flames. In the Fontanian lore, the book Pear and Harry tells the tale of an outlander in the ancient kingdom of Conria, and it was released aside Arlecchino in her update. And that connects us back to Arlecchino because we have Pear and Harry, Peruware, Arlecchino's original name, Pari, which is you're starting to see we have all these connections tightly weaved together, the stories of Inazuma, Fontaine, and Sumeru, and we're starting to see a rich tapestry of lore that combines the three nations. We have eternity, we have a prophecy that is foiled, and we have the nation of dreams. And fun enough, we're going to connect Liyue too, because Nahida, she goes into the chasm, and together we encounter forbidden knowledge in the form tied to the Lumen Stone. The Lumen Stone is light. Nahida's quest tells us that the oozing filth is the remnants of the divine knowledge, and that can be cleansed through the light of the Lumen Stone. And so we again see here light coming into darkness and cleansing. I want you to go back and think of before sun and keep that in the back of your mind. Which reminds me of the fact that during his story quest, Albedo, my boy, once remarked that has a natural hostility to outlanders, and he suggested that that knowledge and existence itself are intertwined in struggle, and simply having things that go against that causes eyes to freeze. It causes the rules to start to do things to people who break them, which might explain all the nails that keep falling. The term lumen refers to light, specifically reflected sunlight. You're starting to see the connections here, right? And that connects us to the cleansing of forbidden knowledge. Various types of lumens signify different forms of understanding in Gnosticism. But what is the difference between light and pyro? So pyro is continuously used as a reference to cleansing, but more on that later when we get to Hutal. Why is Arlecchino relevant? Let's bring in a biblical reference. Revelation 6:12 describes the moon turning blood red during a cataclysmic event accompanied by a total eclipse of the sun. This is super interesting because John saw the Lamb open the sixth seal, in which the Lamb usually refers to Jesus, and the sixth seal is the sixth seal of Revelation. On the scroll, we also know that the resurrection occurs to bring Jesus back to open the sixth seal in the Apocryphon of John. So someone is resurrected because Jesus has to open the sixth seal. It is almost prophesized. That is his role in this. And I wouldn't go here, but we do have a reference to John in an actual achievement. Yet the darkness did not overcome it. For the first time, you use lumen stone to clear the crystallizing darkness on an oozing concentration in the chasm. So Genshin has directly linked the Apocryphon of John to the lumen stone and to the forbidden knowledge. So I promise I'm not just making this up. There are connections. And even deeper, the Lumenspar name card has this in it. What flows within the nameless, voiceless azure crystal, the secrets of the heavens, are the whispers of the abyss. In Nahida's second story quest, we had to use the lumen stone in the chasm to clear the ooze, which is why we get this wild statement from Nahida and the floating hydrofungus, who's our little translator, that the oozing filth is actually forbidden knowledge that its light has shone upon, kept forever in a different form, i.e., that the apocalypse was altered by the power of the giant spike. When the celestial nail fell, the oozing filth was what was created, and the forbidden knowledge was hidden within it. So the oozing filth is what we have left of the forbidden knowledge, which really tells us the nail from Celestia turned forbidden knowledge into oozing filth so that it could not spread. So the ooze that remains all over the chasm that we need light to purify is forbidden knowledge. And this marks a time of divine judgment. Arlecchino is a descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty in Conria. It's an era, so to speak, when the crimson moon shines upon the country, which then turns into the eclipse after some time. So the nail alters the corruption of forbidden knowledge on this world, which reminds me of something I referenced earlier, what Albedo was talking about when he said, have you ever considered that the world of Teyvat may have a natural hostility to outlanders? The only other life form that, like you, has come from afar is the seed that I mentioned, the seed from his story quest. And under the effects of Teyvat's natural laws, it isn't even able to sprout, let alone bloom. And so Arlecchino also comes from beyond the stars. This is something we learn from her. She is kind of a figure that is removed from time, and we don't really understand how or why, because she definitely grew up in the House of the Hearth, but she also definitely has ties to Conry and the Crimson Moon dynasty and is much older than she seems, or at least her connections are. And lumen in particular is an interesting word to use here for light because lumen specifically refers to light from the moon. But we all know that light from the moon is really just reflected sunlight. So we're using reflected light from the sun to cleanse forbidden knowledge once it comes from the moon, once it reflects off the moon. And lumen historically can describe different types of light. Lumen natural, and that different types of light is different types of knowledge. Lumen natural is knowledge via human reasons, or knowledge that is gained by philosophers. Lumen fidei is knowledge via divine revelations or prophets, and lumen gratiae is knowledge via divine grace. Lumen fidei, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing this, is also the one that's most relevant here out of the three. Sol Invictus, Mavuic Historicus, was actually the original lumen fidei, source of light or revelation, until people switched to Christianity. Like historically, Sol Invictus was the sun god or the divine prophet revelation of the sun. And it seems like the people that left during the year of darkness and before sun and moon, that group of people might actually be somewhat based off of the people who followed the Sol Invictus in historical context, which is actually really close to the historical lore of the way the sun was described throughout Teyvat's history. And so, what is Harbinger? Does Harbinger also have a double meaning here and a more biblical one? What if the new eternity being sought out is part of the Fatui's plan? And so you see that Arlecchino and her flames also kind of have, just like lumen has multiple meanings, we're tracking multiple meanings of peri or pari or paraware and how flames can come to pass. And the only reason I talked about Jesus in Arlecchino section is because in Genshin, in the context of the game, the lamb has always referred to Arlecchino, where the lamb in Christianity refers to Jesus. But I'm focusing on that sixth seal, the breaking of the sixth seal, which allows revelation to come. I think that the Zaritza, there are seven seals, there are seven no seas. The Zaritza is trying to bring about a revelation of her own. And Arlecchino is very important in this project and will be doing something as the lamb. And her fire powers themselves are very, very important because after the six seals are broken and there are the seven trumpets of revelations. And like the first trumpet, I want to walk y'all through these because I think these are so fascinating. The first trumpet is when green and grassy and a third of the world's trees are, you guessed it, burned away. The second trumpet says that a third of the sea becomes blood and a lot of sea life and ships are destroyed. The third trumpet says that all the waters turn bitter. The fourth trumpet tells us the sun, moon, and the stars no longer shine. The fifth trumpet has locusts, the invasion of them. The sixth trumpet has, you guessed it, a third of mankind dies. And the seventh trumpet is about where the kingdom of God is declared. And that is kind of the end of the revelations. And if you look at these, I think we can find some foreshadowing here. I really don't want to see a third of the world killed out. So please, Genshin, we gotta sort that out. And that's going to take us to the final character that I want to do a deep dive into. We're going to look at Nilo and Hu Tao together, but mostly Nilo with a little bit of tying into Hu Tao. So just wait. I wouldn't have even included Hu Tao if it had not been for this most recent lantern, right? So Nilo, to our dear goddess of flowers, Nabu Malikata, a figure I'm going to say is much like the Melusines and other creatures, is perhaps a god born of the tragedy following the fall of the two Min sisters. From what we know, Nabu Malikata emerged in the desert, injured and bereft of hope. From her wounds flowing And from her wounds flowed streams that nourished the barren land, creating a beautiful oasis. And that oasis was the birthplace of the jinn. And it was here that she was found, Nabu Malikata, by King Deshret and formed a divine union. I like to call it the divine throuple with the greater Lord Rukkhadevata. And so that history, the fact that Nabu Malikana probably came into being around the time of the Moon Sisters, we have a lot of beings, and why I compare it to the Melusines, that were created in the death of other beings or in the change of their form. And so I kind of think Nabu Malikata could be a remnant of the moon herself. And that is kind of like what we see when we're talking about the Nilopala lotuses, which somewhat represent her. She's also represented by the Padisaras, but that those have some symbolism here, and that is also Nilo's love flower. So let's turn our attention to Nilo. Nilo is the modern embodiment of Nabu Malikata in the Genshin storyline. Although originating from Sumeru, her essence mirrors that of the goddess of flowers, and their stories are intertwined. She is adorned with distinct horns and a crown bearing the lotus motif. She carries the trifoil symbol, a mark that proudly graces the eternal oasis that Paimon uses, that echoes in the motifs found at the Wangshan funeral parlor, and we come to associate that with the passing or the next life. And so Nilo, it's really interesting to me, was also chosen as the forest fairy in Simulanka, and she was never quite understanding of why she was chosen as the fairy, but as a spirit who is able to help guide others. I think we are making a deeper reference here about the role of the moon or the role of the goddess of flowers and other players in the story yet to come. But in a future as distant and deep as the night sky, where most good and evil coexist. And if you go back to the references within Genshin, specifically with the Nilopala Lotus, you'll find that they were talking about children who looked at the sky, and those children would be guided, and it would grow pure heartedness in the hearts of those who wished upon it. And so I think that this is a really interesting parallel because it's basically saying that the moon and wishing upon it is a way to cleanse your heart or to cleanse your being or your soul. And what then if the moons had a cleansing role? If the chariot cleansed parts of the world, what would happen if that cleansing power just disappeared? And it's fascinating to note that Turkish Urshi and Persian Peri are creatures of mythology, often said to be descended from, you guessed it, angels, much like the Seelie and Genshin's lore, are very heavily referenced in Sumeru's lore. In Nilo's artifacts, which unveil the tale of the Pari, the Genshin equivalent to the fairy we cherish, we learn that when Nabu Malikata learned of King Deshret's perilous plan to destroy heaven, she sought the aid of homegirl Rukkhadevata. From her divine energy, she created Nabu Malikata, a being akin to her daughter, the great bird Sigmur. And you'll remember I've referenced that is a reference to phoenixes, and a phoenix is also a reference to Arlecchino in this regard. Arlecchino's outfit kind of resembles a bird. She kind of has feathers. She's almost motifed after a spider and a bird, which I find is really interesting. But Sigmar, the majestic creature, thrived through the ages, and he started as a guardian between new birth and death. And this lasted for thousands of years, protecting the border until the cataclysm. And what border is this? It is a border between life and death, folks. And that is basically kind of like what Nabu Malikata was doing here. She was trying to protect the veil. And so, but during the cataclysm, Sigmar died. The demise happened, very sad. But from Sigmar came the Pari, which is a poignant reminder of life and its loss. I really love how Genshin always turns death is not permanent. Death is simply rebirth, and new things come from death. The true death in Genshin is not being remembered. It's the loss of your record or your influence. And so that brings me back to the Nilopala lotus, which blooms under the moon's gaze. The chariot of the moon goddesses once radiated a light as brilliant as the sun, bringing peace to all. Again, it cleansed people to look at it. But when chaos struck and the beauty of that era faded, The lotuses bloomed in remembrance of the joyous songs from long ago. And so the legacy of Nabu Malikata, and that is a testament to love, loss, and the beauty of life reborn. But it also provides hope about new things. And so, could Nilo be connected to the new moon? Could the reason that Nabu Malikata was here was to show us the dream left by the moon, as the lotuses did, and to make us remember that the dream is the sheltered eternity. And while most are content to live, as Thane Sleeve said, some dream of breaking out. And I think the people who are dreaming of that right now are most likely the Fatui. Moving on to the next part of this video, I would really like to talk about the Hexen Circle in the Loom of Fate. And this is the last kind of explanatory part of the video, and then we'll move into my 3 or 4 big theories before we end it out. And thank you so much if you've come this far. I really like to ramble. It's one of my first longer videos, but I've really enjoyed writing the script and getting into it, and I hope it comes across and you enjoy that. But let's get into the Hexen Circle. The Hexen Circle seeks to unravel the mystery surrounding Irminsul, the tree of knowledge and memory in Teyvat. Their inquiries are deep, woven into the very fabric of fate and history. The Loom of Fate is a device that can hack Irminsul, so to speak. It affects memories and alters the ley lines in ways we are just beginning to understand. The Lord of the Night tells us she is not familiar with that concept. She says this device is capable of weaving and creating ley lines, you say? Even I, the Lord of the Night, cannot create something from nothing. I can only reconstruct the ley lines by reassembling the yet intact components into a new structure. So, if the power of the Loom of Fate were available to the people of Natlan, they might have had a new option against the Abyss. If corruption strikes, it could heal the ley lines or even create new ones, i.e., it could serve as an alternative to cleansing forbidden knowledge or other nasty things from the ley lines of Natlan, i.e., it could be another version of what hit the chasm, a celestial nail. And it seems that celestial nails have served as countermeasures against the Abyss, a force long feared and misunderstood. Instead of destroying the root of knowledge, instead of driving a nail and severing that piece as they did in South Indigar or Dragonspine, they could actually cleanse it. But why do we care? Because we need to decide, is unsolved fate memory, or is it both? And who is doing it? Who is maintaining it? Who is cleansing it? Part of me thinks it's the Hexen Circle. Rukkhadevata tells us forbidden knowledge originates from beyond, and it is incompatible with Teyvat, much like Albedos theorizes. It leads us to corruption and destruction. The Abyss is one of the 3 realms, along with the light realm and the human realm, and its power corrupts, manifesting as entities that would come to make up the Abyss Order. Now, when it comes to the Fatui, we know Dottore sent Scaramouche into the Abyss numerous times at the orders of Piero in search of information we believe on Irminsul, since Scaramouche was able to tap into it. Scaramouche connects all of these different theories and all of these different nations as well. Reincarnation, the goddess of flowers, collecting elemental energy. His very essence echoes through the void in the story, much like the Abyss during his attempts to create a god. I think his story is allegorical, much like what's going on and how the world has changed. I think the heavenly principles tried to change the rules of the world, much like Scaramouche tried to change the memories inscribed in Irminsul. I think it didn't go exactly as planned, and the world has been altered, but the heavenly principles has been doing something with these gnosis and archons to cleanse or take the role of the Moon Sisters to keep the world functional. But what is she protecting or trying to create? I don't actually know. I really would like to. But in Scaramouche's case, he was trying to create a god. And I think it's interesting and perhaps proof of the fact that Tori is doing moon research that look at Scaramouche's crown in his boss form. It resembles the celestial crowns we see on Paimon. It resembles Neela's crown. And why? But we still don't know why the Fatui was sending Scaramouche to the Abyss and what Piero wanted to know. In Fontaine, exposure to primordial seawater turned the oceanid humans into abyssal creatures, while regular humans dissolved into goo. abyssal ooze, much like we found in the chasms, and much like what we now know to be forbidden knowledge. Like what happened to the forbidden knowledge? Suggesting that humanity themselves may be a type of forbidden knowledge, which would make some sense given the heavenly principles engaged in the same sin as Egeria, and according to Before Sun and Moon, created humanity in Teyvat. But unlike forbidden knowledge, the abyss can either be absorbed or delayed, but it can never be overcome. You can't just get rid of it with a nail. The Abyss Order harnesses the abyss, much like the dragons attempted to wield forbidden knowledge against the heavenly principles. Is this perhaps just another weapon? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, after all. But why this alliance? Something about the abyss threatens the heavenly principles, established rules and order in Teyvat. And as the Hetson Circle continues their investigation, the delicate balance of fate, memory, and the looming threat of the abyss draws even closer. Each thread they pull reveals deeper truths and greater dangers intertwined with the fabric of Teyvat's destiny. And so here I would say that the loom of faith is perhaps the answer inside Irminsul that they have been looking for. I would even venture to say the Hexen Circle is looking for ways to cleanse or change Teyvat, to maintain records, to keep things from being destroyed. And they are doing their best at it, but that they don't have all the information. And that perhaps the Abyss Order is also doing the same. Thus why they sought to create the Loom of Fate. It might be that every individual in Teyvat is looking for an alternative to the Moon Sisters now that they are gone, and to keeping Teyvat in a functioning world. And I find it really interesting. If you look at Scaramouche's skill, Maniga, Song of the Wind, the flavor text we get on it is the world dances in a weightless world, presenting a secret that can only be found in the flowers. And what flower are we thinking about? I don't know. Maybe the Nilopala lotus. Maybe it's a different flower, but we do know that there is a secret of the world, and that the world has been unable to escape this weightlessness, this timelessness, this place ever since the demise of the Moon Sisters, whether by the heavenly principles plan and creation, or whether by the circumstance that they have been trapped, intentionally or otherwise, we don't actually know. And this brings me to the theory part of the video. What you've all been waiting for, is if I haven't been spewing a bunch of theories all together for the last hour. No, this is actually where I'm going to try and connect all these ideas into something that makes sense. And so we're going to talk about three main things. We're going to talk about the Wardens of Death. We're going to come back to Arlecchino and the Fatulian, talk about Project Stuja. And then I'm going to go talk about something no one probably thought about. I'm going to go talk about the Mara Javari. I'm going to leave you with a big theory and close this out. And I really, really hope I see you again. So let's talk about the Wardens of Death. And I am finally, as I have promised, going to talk about Hu Tao here. In a world steeped in supernatural intrigue and lore, the destinies of Hu Tao and Nilo intertwine in unexpected ways, suggesting that their connections go beyond mere aesthetics, such as their iconic pigtails. Both characters, though from distinct regions, Hu Tao of Liyue and Nilo of Sumeru, are deeply rooted in heritage linked to the delicate balance between life and death. This hidden kinship unfolds through ancient practices and cosmological shifts that have shaped Teyvat's understanding of mortality. In Inazuma, Yae Miko plays a crucial role in safeguarding this balance via the sacred Sakura cleansing ritual, and I mean the balance between life and death. Similarly, the enigmatic Siglali, known by the Lord of the Night and known by the Natlanese as someone who is able to speak with the dead, takes on a parallel responsibility overseeing the nocturnal realms where life reemerges from death. And in the time before we finish the Archon quest, actually helps those who are unable to pass find peace, or is able to tell them and let them disperse, even if they're not able to go to the afterlife. In Mondstadt, Venti, the Animo Archon, serves as the harbinger of souls, guiding the children of the wind, as we see in the story quest with Stanley and Hans, towards their final resting point. Yet these roles converge to reveal significant implications about the lost mechanics of life and death across Teyvat. Central to this idea are the Moon Sisters, Arya, Sana, and Canon, whose demise predates the tumultuous end of the dragons, as it has come, and who actually predates the third descender, whose body was probably used to make the Gnosis. Their legendary journeys through the heavens in a silver carriage underpins that there was a unique system of sovereignty that rotated among them. Such was a structure that raised the pivotal questions. Why did the Moon Sisters switch places? How did their absence contribute to the disruptions of death and Teyvat? Their passing implicated that it changed the very nature and fabric of how logic works in Teyvat and how death works. And that since their demise, death and the afterlife have operated under altered rules, rules that once thrived in harmony before their departure. Evidence such as from characters such as Capitano, Nova, and the Lord of the Night confirms this. Prior to the death of the goddesses, death was a dynamic process, one that allowed for a more seamless transition between the realms, or so I theorize. The ancient conflict between the dragons and the descenders not only ravaged Natland, but it also left the abyss to spread its insidious reach. Here, the Night Kingdom, because Natland's ley lines were very, very hurt, was created as a peculiar conduit for Natlan, with the ley lines fusing its essence away from Irminsul to create a new spiritual network that would allow those who died to pass. Think of it as a hypothetical main server as to that spiritual network, and Natlan became a private server of death. However, the limitations of these ley lines have profound consequences. The Wyab and the Lord of the Night cannot shield Natlan natives who die outside its borders due to the lack of connection to other nations. And Capitano harbors ambitious plans to bridge that gap and restore the ley lines. He and the souls he carries cannot actually find peace. Previous interferences made to Irminsul and the rules of Renova that curse the people of Conria to live forever have changed their ability to access the afterlife. As Zhongli's revelations hint in the actual most recent Lantern Rite, the traveler is also disconnected from Irminsul much in the same way. And so we're starting to understand what that means is that death in its traditional form in Teyvat may not be available to the traveler. I really wish Zhongli had finished this sentence here, because he says, "You do know what that means, right?" And the traveler's like, "No, what does that mean?" And he's like, "The ceremony is starting. We should really focus on that." Huta's trying her best. And she was trying her best, but bruh, you could have finished your sentence. I think you really should have finished your sentence, because then I could not look like a crazy person here. But I think like that was why a lot of people say the forging of the ancient name was unnecessary, but that was why we did it. We needed to connect the traveler to some ley line. We need to get the traveler connected in some way. And it did mean that the Ode of Resurrection could be used on the traveler if we had died, but it also means that for some part, we have finally been able to connect to the ley lines of this world, even though they are not connected to Irminsul themselves. They have been separated like by a celestial nail, although in the case of Natlan, it seems to be just mass destruction, not through a nail like it was in South Indigar or Dragonspine. Lost trees around Teyvat also emerge as significant markers in this connectivity paradigm, from the frost-bearing tree in South Indigar to withered trees in the chasm and on Sarumi Island. These remnants signify an altered landscape of connection and memory. Meanwhile, living trees, such as the sacred sakura and the weeping willow of Fontaine, hint that there are other meanings to trees. Not all of these are connected to Irminsul, although they are all relevant. They all have some bearing when you look at them, and they all seem to be related to memory and memory of death, as most of these tell the story of how a civilization died or how a people died. Even the sacred sakura was born out of the death of Makoto and Kitsune Saigu, who gave her life to really let it happen. And the weeping willow of Fontaine brings us closer to kind of the truth of how the Melusine were created. And so as this exploration of connections and losses unfolds, we have to think about Project Susan and what the Fatui really want to get out of this. All we know is that it's tied to the trees, it's tied to perhaps the burning of the Sumeru tree, and that they are burning away the old world, which we actually know might be the new world, because the current world is the one that was created by the heavenly principles in that before sun and moon origin myth. But what if this is the old world and we want to reach the new world, the new moon, and perhaps Totori is creating the new moon? Well, we don't know. But what we do know is in the most recent Lantern Rite, but she uses the Staff of Halma and historic power to cleanse the breach between life and death that is occurring. And so we see that it's not even the heavenly principles are able to maintain this. Humanity itself has a role in protecting, just like Lolly, just like Yaimiko with the cleansing and Venti. It is the role of the people in Teyvat to make sure that people reach the afterlife, that the afterlife stays connected, that death remains on one side and living on the other. And all of our characters are very in tune with these borders and having to defend or change them, which, when you think about it, role of humanity to make sure death stays where it is. And is death this encroaching thing? I don't know. But I do think what we can pull from this is that post the fall of the Moon Sisters may have been the original wardens of death, but post the fall of the Moon Sisters, each specific culture in Teyvat had to find a new way to handle death and to make sure that it was functioning properly. And that is my theory on what the wardens of death are across Teyvat. It is really a replacement for whatever role the Moon Sisters served and however Renova and the Heavenly Principles have rewritten. And so the second theory that we're going to go into is Project Stuza. So Project Stuza emerges as a mysterious initiative spearheaded by Pantalone. And he is our cunning banker, our architect of Snezhnai's economic policies, with the implications that extend beyond the mere political machinations of the Fatui. This project is involving everyone. It has a troubling shadow over the very essence of Teyvat, and it suggests a dramatic reconfiguration of life, a new world, a new burning, and a new form of death that may occur, and how the balance of the world will shift post this project. Pantalone's ultimate goal appears to be an audacious challenge to the natural order, possibly revolving around resurrection of the Moon Sisters, and it would be really interesting to close out the Natlan arc with more, not on the sun, but if Natlan is the sun, then it only makes sense in a game that has consistently tied the sun and the moon to also close out the story of the moon in this nation before we go move on, to start it and kind of get us thinking about the moons. And I think that that is what's going on, and that is where we will find the Doctor. But I also think that this points to deeper connection with forbidden knowledge, because we see the first insight we got into Project Stuza came from a dream. It came from a dream from Pale in Sumeru, which is now like 3 years ago, where she receives a vision of Irminsul being linked to the Archon residue. And Pale, if you remember, is someone that Dotori experimented on. Her nightmarish dreams manifest the ominous presence of things, and like Elazar is a disease that comes from the Archon residue, which infected her, and which is why she can see these things, because she's kind of had like a glimpse of forbidden knowledge. But you'll also remember that when we were talking about the Lotus, when we were talking about Varna and all that, that the Neelapala Lotus has told us that children could see truth in these dreams. And perhaps Pale is actually seeing one of the moments the dream is broken, when the fire is used to cleanse, when they can move beyond. Because the only time we've really gotten a glimpse of the fake sky was through the Pyro Archon's powers, which kind of implies the moon is cleansed in one way, but the natural counteraction to that is the power of Pyro, is the power of fire to cleanse, which we see is the balance between like Hu Tao and Nilo. It's the balance between Arlecchino on one side and Skirk, who seems to be kind of a cryo, like two figures who describe two different parts of the world, the sun and the moon, but who cleanse in very different ways. And so I would really like to see that come more into fruition, and for us to understand by the end of Project Stuza why the Archons are inherently tied into this. How are the Archons and their residue and the forbidden knowledge tied together? I want to know specifically, do the Archons, can they handle forbidden knowledge? Because it kind of seems like maybe they can. Maybe they can do more with it than other people can. And perhaps that is why she needs the Gnosis. the Zaritza, because if the Gnosis, because think the Gnosis are created from the body of the third descender. If the Gnosi, they are not from this world. So maybe they can handle knowledge not from this world. And perhaps that is what the heavenly principles was doing. She was using the archons as a purification method as well. That's also just a theory, but it's kind of supplemental to this. But you'll also think about visions being granted as a form of sight and kind of like getting a vision. And what does the Fatui use? They use delusions. And what is a delusion? A delusion is like a vision of grandeur or something where it's not true, but you think it is. It's a false truth, like a false sky, maybe. But we see that a remnant of archon power intertwined with negative emotions gives a hint at the future. It gives a hint of prophecy, if you will. And that connects us to the experiments that Dottore has been doing. He's been in Tatarasuna. He actually caused most of that. And Inazuma collecting the enigmatic crystal marrow, which came from the death of Oroboshi. Oroboshi was slain for obtaining forbidden knowledge. They have been going around and gathering hints of forbidden knowledge throughout this entire story. And what do delusions do? They hurt people. They drain their life force. It reminds me of what happened to people when the veil between life and death was weakened in the most recent Lantern Rite story. And so it also introduces us to the concept of black fire, which likely comes from the delusions. And that has like a corrosive essence that is steeped in forbidden knowledge or some dark energy that is actually able to destroy things. Like think about the withering zones in Sumeru. This stuff is not a joke, and it is actually probably the same stuff that killed the Yaksha. But there's not total agreement. Project Stuza creates a rift within the Fatui, including dissent from Child and Arlecchino. They don't seem really happy about it, but yet three of the most influential players of the Fatui, Dottore, Puccinella, the mayor of Snezhnaya, and Pantalone, are all on another side. And we kind of see this with the table split in the original Fatui trailer. That makes me wonder if perhaps there are factions that are split here and they are kind of united by a goal of rewriting the world, but they don't actually agree on using this forbidden knowledge to do it or using this residue. But we do know that Project Stuza is going to involve a vile concoction, likely created by Dottore, of corrupted energies that is aiming to sever the connection with Irminsul and acting to maybe change the way that the heavenly principles has re-altered the world order of Teyvat. And rather than a definitive end, true death in Teyvat, as I've said before, translates to being forgotten. And that is a thematic resonance we see in Scaramouche and Rukkhadevata and Caribe. And I wonder what would happen if they are perhaps trying to purge records from Irminsul. If they are trying, because the Celestial Nails, when they fail, were to cut forbidden knowledge from reaching Irminsul. But what if they can inject it directly in the source? What if the new moon rises and that's how they do it? I don't know, but I think this is likely getting closer to the truth of what Dottore is trying to do. And we do know the death of the Moon Sisters fundamentally altering the death cycle. It means that perhaps Teyvat wasn't actually a world where you moved beyond the veil of death and there was an afterlife. I think before, Teyvat was a world of reincarnation. And since the heavenly principles has switched us and people no longer reincarnate, these cycles no longer continue, we are stuck inside the samsara, and that is the sheltered eternity. And that is why I say eternity is the method. It is how we have frozen, not the thing that we should be ascribing to do. The eternity is not the thing we're trying to reach. It is the very thing that holds us in place. It is the nail itself, if you will. And so the death and the cycle of reincarnation that I'm going to say maybe was operated by the Moon Sisters is not working anymore. And Irminsul's maintenance and why the Hetson Circle is looking into it so much now becomes very interesting when you start to think about the stars are forecasting the future, but the future is really the history of the future. The future is the past, whatever. And this delicate balance is the fact that no one can find out certain truths or they have to die, which is why Raiden A kills Oroboshi. And such themes that we look at that and we think about the House of the Hearth and Arlecchino's involvement in managing flames and managing like the expectation of being able to live and to grow older inside the organization of the Fatui, and her having to kill her predecessor to take her role because Arlecchino was a child herself, basically. She was in her teenage years, it seems, when she killed Sabina, that it makes you wonder about the art. It makes you wonder about the role youth plays and how the Neolapala lotuses and Sumeru has all outlined children as being extremely, extremely important. And it makes me wonder why the people of Nodcry are all so young and why Dotori has been kidnapping children this whole time. And I think this will get us more to the truth of Project Stuza. When you think about Hu Tao's experiences with memory and ghosts during Lantern Rite, we also get another really, really stunning revelation. One, who does speak to actual ghosts. She speaks to her father and her grandfather, but they are beyond the veil. They do not resemble the fragments of memory we have met throughout the ley lines. And that tells us that those memories are not actual remains. Those are just what they have been calling them the entirety of Genshin. They are echoes, they are fragments, but they don't want to stay in the cell. They're constantly bubbling out and escaping. And so Capitana, when he goes to Renova, he understood that these rules could not just be broken willy-nilly. He sees that it would create a paradox and that Renova, as the Shade of Death, cannot actually solve it. And I wonder if confirming this was really important to the Tsaritsa, and the price of confirming it was worth the pyronosis to her, and to confirm that Capitana could in fact be the Shade, that they could be out-tricked. And I think that we may find the very essence of death may have belonged to the Moon Sisters. Maybe the sovereigns of death, the sovereigns of reincarnation, were the moon themselves. And you can think about this. The moon is often like the Morgan, Hecate. There are goddesses throughout history. When they are related to the moon, they are related to magic, and they are related to the cycle of life and rebirth. And we also have Arlecchino and Sigmar all relating to phoenixes, which are also about cycles of rebirth and death being cleansed. But we'll see the Tsaritsa's motivations at this point, they remain ambiguous. She could be the frozen moon sister herself, who has never escaped her palace. We've never seen her. She's never left, and she is actively engaging in save the points of death that have been previously altered, using Project Stuza to burn away this world and return to the original world order. Maybe she is not the usurper we thought, but she is a member of the original that were usurped. Because remember, the heavenly principles themselves, as Nuvalet calls them, is an usurper. So who came before? What we do know, the Tsaritsa is not one of the original members of the Seven. So perhaps her predecessor was the Moon Sister. But if she's not dead, because we know she's just ceased to turn, perhaps she is frozen in time, and the Tsaritsa may be a remnant of the moon that is actually aiming to break her out and to return to that. There are a lot of different ways they could be intertwined. We just don't know how yet. But the interplay between dark energies, the natural order, and the very fabric of existence that raises all these profound questions about what it means to live, die, and be remembered in Teyvat. It's just fascinating. And as factions clash and the stakes rise, the future of Teyvat hangs in the balance. And only time will tell us, literally, what is happening and where we're going. Finally, theory number 3, before the big theory to close us out, we're going to talk about Marjavari. First off, for my Marjavari theory, let's talk about the Marjavari character, who is also a specific constellation that relates to wheels and fate, and it belongs to none other than my boy Bennett. The constellations include the Grand, Expectation, Impassive Conqueror, Unstoppable Fever, Unexpected Odyssey, True Explorer, Fire Ventures Within Me. These constellations basically serve as an overview of the chapters in Bennett's story. Now, Bennett was founded in Marjavari, which translates to the Silent Sea of Ashes. Venti paints a haunting picture with his words about endlessly burning ashes where the wind fails to blow. Sitlali even mentions that no one knows where this place anymore. It randomly friggin' disappeared off the edge of the map. We have this imagery of one dead moon hanging in the sky, broken, while another remains frozen, refusing to leave her palace. And this makes me wonder if perhaps Marjavari is the site of a battlefield, or perhaps a moon landing, a moon shattering. It could also have been a refuge for people to escape to, those people that left, that are no longer able to find their way home. And somehow that Bennett was a part of that group, and he was rescued. And this gives us a hint at Bennett's age, as Marjorie vanished off the face of Teyvat 20 to 30 years prior to the game's events. A tapestry in Natlan tells us that it used to be a thriving area at Marjorie, but it was further destroyed during the cataclysm. So before 500 years ago, the place was peachy. Then it went to shit. So likely not a Moon Sister's fault, but something that was dramatically inflicted. And we might not see this area until we get Collective of Plenty, but that's the 5.5 update. It makes me think where we will find the next clues leading us to Nodcry is in Marjorie, which hopefully we will visit before the end of now. I can't help but wonder if some kind of dragon still resides there. Remember, Marjorie is described as being at the edge of the world. Venti once said it was so close and yet so far. But here's the kicker. Nodcry is not located in Snezhnaya. If it's south of there, near where Marjorie used to be, way at the edge of the map, kind of like in the sea, it raises questions about why extreme cold and heat would coexist so close together. And if that has anything to do with the moons and the suns, maybe when that moon chariot fell, it created Nodcry. Maybe when that sun chariot fell, it created Marjorie. Another curious thought that crosses my mind: does this imply that the Frost Moon people are all kids? I've said this several times throughout this video, but what's going on with them? We have fragments of the moon found in Natlan near its border too, so it seems likely that the moon did fall around this area, and the Fatui want the parts back. So Marjorie could also be a place related to where the moon fell, but those pieces were dormant and some shit went down during the cataclysm. Don't know, excited to find out, but I do think Marjorie and Nodcry are inextricably linked for some reason, which makes me think that maybe she wasn't always so associated with Cryo. And it means that certain individuals, like the goddess of flowers, the Zaritza, and Paimon, are likely all tied together. I suspect that the Hexen Circle is actively trying to unravel how fate is twisted and thinks and knows are. They're foreshadowing, but they're also them trying to create records of the past in the form of fairy tales that cannot be altered by changing the memory of Irminsul. And so we move on to the big boy, in a pivotal moment of prophecy, when the Zaritza, an enigmatic and powerful figure, unlocks the last seal of revelation through Arlecchino, a cosmic event will unfold. This moment is the collection of the six gnosis. It is in Fontaine, if we assume she has the cryonis. She also has the power of Descender and perhaps the flame-purging power of Arlecchino, which has been briefly referenced. Arlecchino has some weird firepower in her black hands, and that will be used as her replacement for the Son of the Pyronosis, which means she has the power to change the will of the world itself, because remember, the Gnosis are the remains of the third Descender. And as the narrative unfolds, an eclipse occurs perhaps at the same time, and it symbolizes we're entering a time of darkness and transition. This is when, during this eclipse, Project Stuza will be initiated. This project, shrouded in mystery, will be an attempt by the Fatui to manipulate the celestial bodies. In an audacious display of power, I believe the Fatui are going to try to hang the moons back in the sky. They're going to try and either put them back together or replace them with false moons, or put the new moon up there. This act will serve a dual purpose. One, it will restore guidance to those who have been cast away from their home, those who, like in Simulonk and before a sun and moon, were unable to find their way home. And it will also signal the beginning of this new war, the final, because the eclipses are a symbol of representation or of transformation and revealing truths or finding obscured truths. And so I think this will foreshadow the ending to end the endings of the story. So the beginning of the ending will happen here. And I believe Project Stuza will be a cataclysmic event. Perhaps not cataclysm levels, but it will be a big fucking deal that heralds battles over ideas, dominions, and the very fate of Teyvat. It will be about picking sides. And in the midst of that turmoil, the characters, heroes and adversaries alike, will have to decide where their loyalties lie, how they will deal with the past, and what destinies they will embrace. And they will also have to see if they can even defy their own destinies, or if the stars have to be written. And I wonder if perhaps this will wake up the heavenly principles. As the story progresses to Snezhnaya, a region marked by ice and strife, all these motives and competing interests, and hopefully the contract Zhongli made ages ago, will all come to light. Zaritza could be a moon sister herself, or perhaps someone who is just sad by the loss of them, or perhaps she is the new moon, not Paimon. Only 5.5, and time shall tell. What do you think lies ahead in the vastness of Teyvat? Are we on the brink of discovering the fate of the Moon Sisters and the many questions we've yet to answer? Leave your thoughts below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more lore explorations in the world of Genshin Impact. Until next time, Ad Astra Abyssos.